Hello.
Hi. Hey, Donna.
Steve, how are you?
Hey, doing all right. See you.
Good to see you. Hi, Sparrow.
Hello, Donna.
So,
Hi, Sparrow.
Hello.
do you know each other?
Let me-
Sparrow,
I
Toby, Steve Breyer.
need to change.
Nice to meet you.
Beth Wilson, Steve Breyer.
Hi, Beth. How are you?
I'm fine. Hi, Steve. Yeah, we met, I think, when you and Mike came up and spoke at New Paltz about the Austerity Blues book.
That's right.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. That worked. I just changed my, yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Actually, let me.
Okay. So, it doesn't matter if you got it or not, but did Sandy send you the order of speakers? Steve? Can you
I
hear-
don't think so, but I think you told me it would be last.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna wrap up and do the, you're gonna do the austerity and really the political analysis of what's going on.
Right.
And the other folks, there's someone before you, Brittany Alston, with she's a researcher with ACRE. Do you know ACRE? Action Center on Race and the Economy.
I don't.
So she's a researcher who looks at how a fairer tax system could conceivably help us. And she worked at the Fiscal Policy Institute. She's
Right.
as a union researcher. So she'll do an analysis and then you'll wrap it up. We'll have,
As I understand, she's also talking about basically like institutional debt and how
Yeah.
that impacts things. Yeah.
oh, okay, so there's the,
I don't, are you having trouble hearing me? My internet connection seems to be a little unstable. Classic
well, that's the,
cable.
that's
That's, it goes
news of
up, it goes
today,
down.
actually. So I can hear you, but you sound like you're breaking up. You sound like you're on a cell phone.
Yeah, and everybody's breaking up on mine. Yeah, given how much money I spend every month on this damn thing, let me
Right.
try to open the door and see if that makes a difference.
But also you're a techie. Aren't you a tech person? And now you're frozen.
I am, but you can't control. Your connection is your connection. It's whatever you have.
Yeah. Well, that's why I have no cell service in my house. So that's why I still have a landline,
Do
I
you think
see.
if you turn your camera off, it might help? Or
No,
It could. I mean, I can turn it off until I have to, come on. Let's see where I am now. Now it's going a little better. It's at 70 megabits per second, so that's sort of okay.
good.
hey, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Hello.
Matt, I'm Donna Goodman. I'm going to be introducing you.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, Donna.
You're going to go on first. After I do an intro to the program, I'll introduce you.
Okay.
Okay, Sandy. Sandy is with us. Good to see you.
Mercury is retrograde. That's all I'm going to say.
It very much is.
How is everyone tonight?
Everyone's great. We're great.
Nice to meet you, Steve.
You too, Sandy. Pleasure. Hi,
And-
Matt.
Hey, Steve.
And Sandy, have you met Matt?
Listen, we're going to get, First Fridays is going to get the Matt Hayes bump tonight. All right. I just want you to know Matt is very popular in Sullivan County. So we're getting the Matt Hayes bump.
Hopefully.
Okay. So we're waiting for Winnie and April.
I'm very sorry about April, folks. I wasn't aware that April was joining us.
Guess what? It's wonderful. It's
Okay.
just wonderful.
Good. I was so excited. We had her colleague from CSCA as
Bridget.
well. So I apologize for the confusion.
No confusion. We're okay. Sparrow, we're not on yet, right? On Facebook?
We're not on Facebook, but we are, the attendees can hear us,
Oh, okay.
the
Okay.
audience.
So when someone is speaking, we're not on screen, is that right? I just want to understand what the screen's
I
gonna
think
look like.
It depends on what
Lighting.
the person has set their Zoom to. So people have a selection on their end with the Zoom, I think.
Right, but
But,
not the audience. It's just panelists that will show.
Yeah, it's just panelists that show.
Hi, April. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. I am switching to a better device.
Okay,
So
great.
just give me one moment.
You have actually a few more than one.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I have a photo lined up for Kathy.
Good.
For when
Sparrow Kathy is a phone number we're gonna have to elevate.
Oh, she's an attendee.
I'm looking. I'm
I
gonna
say
keep-
Caitlin Altman, is that it?
No,
That's one of my,
Oh, okay. Okay.
Kathy Bradford.
I'm gonna find it, Sparrow. I'll find it and text it to you. I'm just gonna.
Okay, yeah.
we are still missing a couple of panelists here.
We're missing Kathy
And Winnie.
and Winnie.
Oh, wait, Winnie has an E on the end of Winnie. I think I misspelled her name in the credit.
Hi,
Oh, yep, here's Winnie.
you're on mute.
Hi, we have a leak in our ceiling, so I was
No.
talking to my partner about the plumber's putty that we need to get.
Okay.
Hi,
Uh,
Winnie. How
No,
are you? Sandy here.
and
Good to see
Brittany.
you. We haven't met. I haven't met Winnie. She's kind of my neighbor in Port Jervis.
Oh, where are you?
Well, I live in Sullivan County, Winnie.
Okay.
But I work in Orange, but it's kind of we're neighbors, right?
Yeah, close enough.
Good. Hi, Brittany.
Hello.
So, Winnie, my name is Donna. I'll be introducing you. And
Okay.
you go after Matt. Then,
Okay.
and April's coming on. Okay, good. So we're just waiting for Kathy.
And she'll be on a phone.
Right. Oh.
relax. You're all in for a really nice ride with the Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation Education Committee. We have a lot of fun once a month with these get-togethers, getting the word out.
Yeah.
So is that Kathy? You're on mute.
No, that's April. April is on mute. Kathy, I don't know.
Oh,
I'm gonna call her.
Okay.
Yes, hello.
April, hi. My name is Donna. I'm going to be introducing you. So I didn't get your bio in advance, so let me just ask you a quick question. So
Sure.
you're a CSEA organizer of preschool workers?
Actually, I am, I guess the best way to describe it is a statewide organizer. So we organize non-union workers. So I apologize, I'm trying to get my screen better. And so in the industry that we're really focused on is what we organize, public and private sector.
Public and
I don't-
private sector, and
Pardon.
what, and is this education?
Well, I think for this particular panel, the focus is on preschool education nonprofit in terms of what I need to be talking about.
Good,
So
okay.
I think, I don't know if I answered your question, your first question correctly.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good.
Okay,
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too.
Okay, Brittany. So we're just waiting for Kathy. And we still have 3 minutes.
I don't know if it might help. So we'll open the Zoom. I have a little kind of credit roll thing that we'll run. And then is Sparrow going to say a few words just about the ALF and the, yep. And then we'll go to Donna, who will give sort of introduce bios for each of you. And we'll, the speakers, you'll each get your, I think we told everybody 5 to 7 minutes. Basically to kind of summarize, kind of main challenges and what's going on in your neck of the woods, basically with organizing around education. And then we'll go to a Q&A section. So I'm the moderator for that. And we'll be, people who are attending can post questions, or sometimes we unmute them and let them ask their own questions, and we have just basically discussion for the rest of the session. So.
Kathy's having some connection problems. I'm just trying to work with her.
All right, I'm gonna start the Facebook Live feed
Good.
stream. Takes a minute.
It did take me a couple times to get on before it would connect.
All right, we're up.
Okay, shall I start the credit sequence?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. There once was a union maid. She never was afraid of the queens and the kings and the company pigs and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. She went to the union hall where a meeting it was called. And when the boys would come to her, oh, this is what she'd say. No, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
Welcome. My name is Sparrow Tobin, president of the Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation. The Labor Federation represents over 100,000 working men, women, families in the Hudson Valley, the Mid-Hudson region. We fight for the common good, worker power, and promote solidarity amongst our workers. Today we have a special program about education and the commitment of, what our government towards education. And I think if you looked at Beth's intro there, and I think what Donna says, that a democracy is not just about voting on election day, it's about participating in our democracy. And sometimes that means ringing the bell, blowing the whistle, marching in the streets to make sure that the government does, and their elected representatives do what we elect them to do. And as far as education, we're ringing the bell as the government is, and on all levels, we need to do this at all levels, is silently walking away from its responsibilities to educate our children and our society. And so, we're ringing the bell here. We're looking at the problems and we're talking about solutions, but this is definitely a participation sport democracy. And, we at the Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation really want to, what kind of government we want, is a government that serves the people and education that's top notch. And so that's what we're fighting for. And hope you can join us in this crusade to save our education and public institutions from this slow creep or backpedaling by folks that from on all levels to save a few bucks. So without further ado, I'd like to thank our co-chairs, Donna Goodman and Beth Wilson, for putting this all together. Our committee members, Ashwini Subthakar, Richard Burton, and Sandy Oxford, and all the panelists joining us today. And you can also watch us live on Facebook and on our website, YouTube channel after this event. And the rest of the First Fridays are located there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sparrow. I'm Donna Goodman. I'm a member of United University Professions at SUNY New Paltz. And we are talking tonight about education. Our speakers tonight come from a whole range of education professions in the classroom, in the offices, on street corners, in the cafeterias, and all are union members. So we're looking to see how unions and how worker organizations can stop this corrosion of the public sector. We talk about the corporations and banks that are worming their way in, but it's the state that's opening the doors to them. It's the corporations and banks. Why? What is it that the state is going to get out of letting the private sector in to take over education, which is really the last holdout of the public sector? And why are these entities, why is the state and its representatives making budget-driven decisions that actually bring down the quality of education? So we're going to hear from folks from preschool all the way up to university. We're going to hear from the practitioners and we're going to hear from the analysts. And we hope to walk away from this evening, not only with a lot of knowledge, but with incentive to really stop this, to strengthen the public sector, strengthen our education sector, and show the kind of solidarity that the labor movement knows how to do across this sector and others. Our first speaker this evening is Matt Haynes, who is a passionate and committed public school teacher in Sullivan County. He teaches middle and high school English at Tri-Valley Central School in Sullivan. In addition to teaching, he's the secondary school vice president for the Tri-Valley Teachers Association and also a member of the board of directors for New York State United Teachers, where he's an at-large director for the districts 13 and 14. We welcome you, Matt, and we look forward to hearing how your members are doing during budget cuts, pandemic, climate change, and all the other things that are really getting in the way of education, and how your union is responding. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. And I just want to say, as being an audience member for many of these, it is an absolute honor and a privilege to be a panelist. I felt great when I was asked. And so I want to thank Sparrow and Sandy and Beth and Don and everyone else behind the scenes because it is an honor for me. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about kind of where I stand right now. And when prepping for this, I actually talked to some of my students to get an idea of where I wanted to start. And every day I have a lunch crew that comes in during their lunch. It's a collection of high school students. They lunch in my room. And I asked them, you know, the year before last school year, we were out of the building from March all the way on. You know, we didn't go back and in. We didn't have kids at all. Last year, we were completely shut down a couple of times, but most kids came in 2 days a week towards the end of the year. Some came in more like 4, but they weren't in school like a regular year, of course. And so I asked them, I said, what is it that you miss about school besides the academics? And I'm going to read to you the list they gave me. They said, first, mental health services. Being able to talk to counselors, being able to talk to social workers, getting help when we're going through a tough time. They mentioned physical health services. So being able to see a nurse if they're not feeling well, if they have a question about something, being able to talk to that professional. They mentioned simple things like the fact that the building is warm, that there's water, that they can get clothing if they need it, that they can get hot meals at the school. They mentioned that the positive role models at school, so teachers, staff members, administrators in the building. They mentioned support when it comes to financial issues, whether they were in a tough spot and family-wise, they knew they could reach out to the school. For the older kids planning for college, they knew they could get help through the school, so how they go about things. They mentioned their social life, not being around their friends, not being able to socialize on a daily basis. And they mentioned just healthy habits. So life skills that maybe they're not learning at home, but that they're learning through school. And it was funny to me because we think of school as just simply taking classes and learning. But the reality is for every single school, there's so much more that goes on. And I think before the pandemic hit, a lot of people didn't always realize all this, but I think some of this has come to light with the pandemic, all these extra services that schools offer. I will tell you, I do want to give a shout out to my local union, Tri-Valley Teachers Association, because a lot of these issues the kids mentioned, whether, it's been during the pandemic or not, we go out of our way to try to provide what families need. We have programs like the snack pack program where we send kids home food every other week. We give families holiday meals. We adopt families around holiday times and buy them gifts. So we certainly do a lot around the community. We have a great community. We partner with them well. So we try to help out in every way we can. But I'm mentioning all this because public schools are so incredibly important, but it seems like, well, it doesn't seem like, it's reality that every single year we're fighting. We're fighting for funding. We're fighting everything possible. And every year, despite inflation, if you look at how much funding the schools have received, it seemed to stay static at best, it seemed to go down, and we have to scratch and claw to get every dollar we can. Unfortunately, when we do not receive enough funding, we're cutting programs, of course, which is detrimental to kids. But some of the other first things to go are things like the mental health services. I mean, there are very few schools, in our area that would say they're adequately staffed in mental health services. And again, with the pandemic, this is needed now more than ever. There are schools that don't have an adequate number of nurses. So when we're dealing with COVID right now, not having nurses in every school building could be a huge problem. There are schools whose buildings are crumbling and quite honestly falling apart, and there just isn't the money there to fix everything. So, the cuts continue to hurt us. I think our last budget was actually the first budget we were pretty happy with in a long time, but it's really detrimental to us. I also wanted to touch on the charter school movement. Charter schools take public funds. They lack transparency and accountability. They don't have transparency. They don't have accountability. If you look at statistically, charter schools do not take many ELL students with disabilities. Charter schools can hold much more in reserves than public schools. And although we don't have any charter schools where I'm in Sullivan County, we have had a couple people bring up ideas over the past couple of years that they wanted to start one. And it's this, this idea of charters that take public funding and really are meant to profit people. I mean, you look at our last Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, charter school advocate, really has no business, no experience being in education, but is there to make some money. I've never met anyone who has looked deep into charter schools and looked at all the aspects and said, you know what, I think they're a really good idea, because once you look into it, you sort of see the scam that they are. So that's an issue across the state for us as well. And I also wanted to bring up, despite the funding, charter schools as well, another issue we're facing is teacher shortage. And all the things I just mentioned, I think teachers are working harder than ever. We're not just teachers, we're counselors, we're certainly involved in many more aspects than just the academic part. But we are up to tier 6 now, so we have teachers who are going to be working until they're in their 60s, which when that becomes a reality, I don't know how schools are possibly going to afford people who are working to they're that old. And really, it's the idea that, listen, none of us get into teaching because we think we're going to be rich. No one says, I'm going to get into teaching, I want to make a ton of money. But do we want to be paid fairly? Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And it is a struggle in some districts to receive, a fair contract. Of course, not every school. My school is pretty good, but this is just another issue that teachers face. I'm very, very proud to be a member of NYSUT, the New York State United Teachers. We are all fierce advocates for our students, for our profession. We advocate all the time with legislators, getting positive news out. So I'm very, very happy with the job we do at NYSUT. I guess I just wanted to sort of end my final remarks by saying that, I just really think it's a shame that every single year we have to beg and plead, it seems. Beg and pleading for everything. And to me, our kids they're our future. And it should be an absolute no-brainer that we are investing everything we can into them. Every program, everything possible to make them successful. It should be an absolute no-brainer. And it appears that it's not, which is obviously disheartening. So that's where I am right now. And I look forward to answering any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and we look forward to having you part of the discussion after the other speakers. Our next speaker is Winnie DeToto. She's a 3-term unit president of CSEA for the Port Jervis School District, where she stands up for her members for non-teaching education workers. Her union represents paraprofessionals, secretarial and cafeteria workers, and public school support staff. Winnie herself has been a teacher's aide for Port Jervis schools since 2001. Please welcome Winnie.
Right. Hi, thank you. As you said, I've been a teacher's aide for 20 years. For the past 10 years, I've worked in special ed, and I absolutely love it. When this pandemic hit, all I keep thinking is the last year that the kids that we work with had a normal school year was 2 years ago. I don't know how anybody's going to catch them up. People are expecting miracles when their kids come to school. My child can't read, but it's going to take time. And I think we not only have to educate our government, but we also need to educate our parents that this is not going to be a quick fix. And I agree with Matt. Begging for these things is absolutely ridiculous. But with my members, we started doing things we never did before. We had food service people delivering meals to the houses with CSEA's blessing, because I checked everything out. We'd make sure 3 of them went at a time. They did not drive their vehicles. They drove a district vehicle. We had some of them standing outside waiting for parents to come pick them up, pick up food for their families. The other thing now is we had teachers' aides doing temperature checks. We had to make sure that we had all the proper equipment. We have to be safe too, not just our students. We had custodians now using chemicals they never used before, using cleaning supplies they never used before. And again, they had to be trained. They also had to have the right equipment. The hardest thing that I see is they're still expecting more from us. Not that we mind doing, but there's only so much support staff can do. Anybody in the school can do, and they need to understand that. They are hiring more people, that I have to say. We do have more people, but it just becomes overwhelming even for us. And I think they forget that all of this pandemic thing affects staff. You hear about one person that has a positive test, and a lot of us go to the dark side. Like, are we going to be back to remote like we were before? So I just hope they don't forget about us, that sometimes we need a little TLC and the pat on the back, because that hasn't been happening in a lot of the schools that I talk to when it comes to support staff. And that is all I have to say at this point.
And it's wonderful to hear that from you. Thank you so much. And we'll hear from you again during the discussion. So our next speaker is April Land. April is also a member of CSEA. She's the lead organizer across a number of industries. And this evening, she's going to talk about preschool. Once again, this evening we're going from preschool up to university, and preschool is facing some novel challenges, again, on the issue of privatization, but they're not sitting back and just being privatized, they're unionizing, and April will tell us about it. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? As Donna said, my name is April Land. I am a CSEA organizer and am very glad to be here. Hello, Winnie. I don't think we've met formally, but I'm very excited to see you. And, awesome work supporting Easter Seals workers. I will start by just saying that we have, Donna's right, we have looked, CSEA has had a success this year in organizing a universal pre-K childcare program called Easter Seals Excel. And it's been a challenge. I'll actually take a step back and pull up my notes. And I will start first with our victory and talk a little bit about some of the successes, the things that CSEA has learned in terms of organizing preschool programs, childcare centers, and I could even talk a little bit about childcare providers, which I hope and might assume that Matt and other NICET members, particularly U of T, are familiar with licensed and registered childcare providers as well. So in terms of all of that, one of the points Matt made was, children are important and they're our future. And it looks like a lot of our priorities in terms of how things are funded are, and especially with how hard union members and workers in general have to fight, is a challenge. We had a victory in this past spring where childcare workers, aides, teachers, teacher aides, and others fought a hard fight. And those of you who are members in the private sector understand how difficult it is often when we can't challenge the use of funds for union busters, particularly in the private sector, because they're not necessarily public funds. In addition to just these workers really understanding power, because I think if I jump to the point, the challenge that we've seen the most in childcare and in any industry is understanding power and workers coming together and being able to take action with a purpose and make changes. I think that is quite a bit of what Wendy was talking about in referencing the way CSEA members under her leadership and her unit were able to notice some of the challenges, not just with COVID, but in general. Matt mentioned that, the children mentioned that were impacting them, food, figuring out how can we use the resources we have, build our power, and address these needs. So I'm kind of off on a tangent in a bit because I'm still reflecting on some of the comments made earlier. But particularly in terms of challenges with organizing childcare in the private sector, when we are unable or have a difficult time challenging how those funds are used, we face union busters. And unfortunately, that is one of the reasons why, unfortunately, we just don't have that much density in some of these private sector childcare centers. So it takes us back to the power, right? We'll always have these challenges, but even in the private and even in the public sector, as has been said a couple of times, we're always fighting. And so really getting workers to understand their agency and their power and how it increases exponentially when it comes together collectively, whether it is teachers' aides organizing themselves to do temperature checks, to support the school district, to support the school, and to support their union, and to prioritize what we care most about, the children, whether it's custodians, working with OSH to be trained on these new chemicals and figure out how do we work in this new world? How do we use our power and show other workers how to use it? So in terms of the successful organizing campaign that occurred at Easter Seals, it was hard and they're still fighting. I know the fight never ends, and it was very important for the workers at this particular preschool program to understand that winning their NLRB election was the first step. The next step is really understanding the power, pulling together, as many members, organizing as many members, and also contributing, paying dues. I know in the public sector, we were inundated with Janus and the impact of that Supreme Court case. In the private sector, particularly in our collective bargaining agreements, we're able to buffer some of that. But at the same time, it's important for workers to understand this is their organization. So I probably should stop there and see towards the end if folks have other questions. and I'll just say my final point, work stops when childcare stops.
That's
If
a
we
good,
don't have Winnie, we don't work.
yeah.
And I probably should have started there, but I really did want to reflect on some of the things that Matt and Winnie said. So, you know, ask me what you want about nonprofit and privatization of childcare. We've already experienced it with nursing homes. Let's just look around New York State and those fights.
Yeah. Thank you, April. And we actually thought about talking about the whole thing, nursing homes, all the public sector tonight. And we thought, no, that's just too big. Let's stick to education, but we'll be back with all of that. And we hope you'll be with us. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Kathy Bradford. She's joining us by phone. Let me make sure. Kathy, are you with us?
I am. I just have my phone. Everything's been acting up today with my wireless. But
okay, let me just introduce.
Okay, sorry.
You were there. So Kathy speaks to us from Vassar College, where she's the head of the college's chapter of SEIU Local 200 United. On January 1st, she became the first woman and the first person of color to be elected president. Oh, there you are. There's a picture of
Yeah.
Kathy. The SEIU represents the college's food service workers and employees of facilities and operations. Kathy herself is employed as an assistant chef. Kathy became a union delegate more than 15 years ago. She was a part-time worker, and she was a member of the negotiating team that reached an agreement with the college to include part-time employees in the union contract. And she also works with students in the campus group Student Labor Dialogue. So please welcome Kathy Bradford. We're happy to have you with us, even if we can't really see you.
Yeah, next another time, but thank you. Nice to meet everyone. Even though I can't see your face right now, but yeah, nice to meet everyone. Yeah, so you want me to tell you about my role or?
Well, yeah, there's many challenges in the public sector with defunding and so on, but in the private sector as well, there are cutbacks in education. In your unit, you represent people from several different occupations and not specifically teachers. So how does it work for you, and how does your union defend the workers who are just as likely to be faced with cutbacks and layoffs and so on?
Well, me and Brian Pugh, which is right now, we this year we had a lot of challenges with the COVID shortage, you know, as far as with employees. We also had you know, where management is lacking, you know, getting us the proper materials and things that broke down that need to be refixed, like flooring and you know, just to keep it. We were also working on the safety to make it safe for everybody in the workplace. We successfully just boosted up the part-time's wage increase, because it was from $12.50 to $14. Now it goes up to, well, actually raised up to $2 more an hour. So that was a success. But we're hoping that it can get up a little bit more too, because to go outside where we work at, if you just go to McDonald's, it's like $15 an hour. But really short of workers in our place, part-timers anyhow, like 11 in my department, and then one in another department, which we already have been sitting down having plenty of meetings with the colleges. That's why we was able to get the part-timers wage increased it. My biggest thing is more about the respect and dignity in the workplace. That's what I've been working on for many years. And, you know, make sure there's equal opportunity in the workplace. I represent food service, along with buildings and grounds, from tradesmen to janitors to cleaners. What else? And my responsibility is really a big responsibility, but over the years I had got extra help to help me besides the union, which is the Student Labor Dialogue, because the students really work hard representing our employees at the college. So I have done protesters in the past. A lot of things that I have fought for over the years that I worked there was protesters. Thank God, since I became the president and the last two before the COVID, I didn't have to really do too much of any protests. So I think over the years with me fighting as hard and, showing the college that I'm about respect and dignity and building the respect and dignity on the campus, that I sent out a strong message. So it took a long years, but now I believe a lot of people appreciate my work. They see the good that I do, and it has become a little bit more easier. Not to say I'm not going to have any battles, but I'm prepared for any battles that I have. And to say all that, I am aware of a lot of things that's happening in the public school districts, and you have to fight. You have to fight. Sometimes it takes a little bit of protesting, because I had a couple of situations that happened with two of my younger kids in the public school districts several years ago, and I have formed a small group with the school district, and we had to fight. We had to fight about some things, but as far as their education, they were lacking teaching the kids the proper education and stuff like that. And then my son had fell on ice. That was another situation. But I've had my share with with my district as far as what things that happen in the school district. But there's a lot more stuff that I do. I'm just talking and trying to talk fast because I don't want to hold up the whole time, because I know everybody else got to speak too. But you just have to keep fighting and believe in what you're doing, and don't let it stop you, and just keep fighting, and get your message clear. You can do it in a respectful manner and just keep fighting and get the support. Always have support, because you can't do it all by yourself. It's pretty much everything. That's my business agent want to step in. Brian, you there? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hey, Kathy, I am. Sorry, I have to keep the phone in the other room to avoid feedback.
Oh, yeah. So I was just letting them know how much we fight and stuff. And, you got to start with respect and dignity when you're starting to fight for things. It's just, build your powerhouse. You get a lot of support, and you start asking for things. People will respect that as long as it's the right and good things. You might get a little bit battles and have to fight, but just keep on going. Don't give up. That's what I always have done, and that's where I'm at today.
Kathy wears many hats and is spinning a lot of plates.
Many places, yes.
There are more than 200 individual members at Vassar, and that's across many different departments. The kitchen is the largest single one, and obviously that's where Kathy is. But we also have grounds people and skilled trades people, and they all have their issues. And Kathy works very hard to balance all of that and keep everyone's issues and priorities moving forward.
Yes. And everything I do, I don't leave nobody out. I put everybody involved, even with people that support me, even if they're not involved with the union, anything like the student groups, anything they need, I help them with them too. So, I just did where everybody build up a support system where everybody work together. And that's the main thing. You have to build a support system where everybody work together. You do that, you'll see more things happening. Hello, is everybody still there?
Yes, okay. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Brian, for chiming in also. Kathy, after all the rest of the speakers have gone, we'll have a discussion, and I know we'll hear from you again. And of course, the main thing you're talking about is not only fighting, but solidarity, and thank you for that.
Yes, yes.
Our next speaker is Brittany Alston. She represents an organization called Action Center on Race and the Economy, ACRE. Brittany is the Deputy Research Director of the organization and uses research to build power in poor communities and in communities of color. Before joining ACRE, Brittany worked as a policy analyst at the Fiscal Policy Institute and worked as a union researcher with Unite Here and with health professionals and allied employees. Her prior research examined the role of unionization in raising the standard of living for workers in low-income communities. Currently, she supports campaigns to fully fund communities through progressive revenue and large-scale changes to the municipal finance system. Brittany holds degrees from Rutgers and from University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Brittany.
Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I should also say that, before I did any of this, I was also a high school English teacher. And that really did inform a lot of the work that I did and why I decided to go back to school to do some of this work. So, just showing solidarity for all of the teachers and allied employees who I know are really going through it this year in particular. But I wanted to talk a little bit today just about the role of budgets in the municipal finance system, which often can sound like, what are you talking about, Brittany? But it is really, really important to think about how our systems are funded and how inequalities show up in those systems. So ACRE is generally a grassroots organization, and we support community organizations and unions who are looking to go on the offense for different types of campaigns, but specifically at the intersection of racial justice and Wall Street accountability. And so we were able to really see from different cities and state governments what was going on this year. And thankfully, we were able to stave off the worst of this economic crisis because we had federal government intervention with the relief dollars that came down. But we know that, year after year, our public services are never fully funded. And I think that Matt mentioned it, when he mentioned it, that we're often in this position where we have to beg for our public services to be funded. And, I recognize that this conversation is about education, but really we could sub in any public service, right? Everyone is begging for crumbs and we're never getting what we need to fully realize what our communities could look like, whether that's housing, whether that's education. And we know that this is sort of all part of the social safety net that we want to be far more robust than what it is right now. And so we end up stuck in what I call like this cycle of financialization. And that's where financial institutions like big banks and wealthy allies, they're lobbying to slash our public budgets, to slash our education budgets. And then they also are strangling the revenue that comes in because they lobby really hard to cut their own taxes, to cut corporate taxes. And then this puts local governments, school districts in this position where they're like, well, we have to get our stuff funded. How do we do it? And then they start walking into the hands of Wall Street, walking into the hands of privatizers. And they often are taking on a lot of expensive debt. And this is also for our sort of moving people toward privatization. And one of the things that I like to highlight is that, this isn't a passive relationship that our school districts, that our universities have with Wall Street. Wall Street actually courts these different entities. So, when we've done research on water systems, when we've done research on schools, a lot of times Wall Street actually has departments where their entire purpose is actually to go to public entities and pitch them on different financial products. And so a lot of what we focused on in 2008, and I was looking at colleges in 2008, but what I have seen now in retrospect is that a lot of Wall Street was actually pitching really predatory debt to our public entities that we are still paying off. So there are these technical financial instruments like interest rate swaps or auction rate securities, right? And basically what those are these toxic debt deals that ended up costing our school districts a lot of money. I'm from Philadelphia, I live in Philadelphia now, and our school district is still paying off a lot of this debt. And some of the school districts are actually engaged currently in a fight with Wall Street banks because they illegally rigged interest rates that also cost school districts, cities, state governments a lot of money. And so when that money starts coming out of our public budgets and goes into the pockets of Wall Street, we have less money for our universities. We have less money for our school districts. And now we're stuck in this relationship with Wall Street that's costing us so much money. And so, you know, when we look at our public universities in particular, and like I said, I think we could really sub in any public entity, but if we're looking at our public universities, when the ultra wealthy and corporations lobby to have budgets slashed, public university budgets are often also on the chopping block. And so as a result, we see public colleges and universities cut jobs, and that places the burden on students to also increase their tuition costs. And then those students also have to take out expensive student loan debt. And we know that especially poor families, Black and brown students often carry the highest burden when it comes to the student loan debt. And so, you know, what we really want to fight for is shifting how we fund our services. And there's two ways that we often talk about what that shift will look like. One is through progressive revenue, and that generally means that rich people need to pay their fair share. And instead of hoarding all of their, you know, excess, we need to be taxing that money so that we can put it into our public services and our public goods, like our universities, like our community colleges, like our school districts. And we also need to really rethink what the financing looks like. So instead of relying on Wall Street, there needs to be public alternatives that we can use so that we aren't spending lots of money on debt every year to fund our infrastructure, like our schools. One of the primary fights in Philadelphia has been around asbestos and lead remediation. A lot of our buildings are filled with lead, filled with asbestos. And when parents and students go to fight, we don't have the money. That is often what they're told, right? We don't have the money to do this. We don't have the money to do that. Now, if Amazon wants to come to the city, they find money for economic development subsidies. They find money for these large corporations where our students, our parents are out here begging for their kids to have a safe place to learn. You know, and so when we think about the scale of this, in 2021, there was $340 billion in outstanding debt from universities, from community colleges, from student housing borrowers, often which are like really crazy developers who don't need to be using public dollars to fund their building. But I think it's just really important to highlight that Wall Street has created this niche in our public sector where they burrowed themselves into our public services and charge us a lot of money for the services that we need to live and to learn. And so, you know, when we think about what we can do differently, I think really thinking about how we tax the rich, how we fight and participate in our public budget processes, and how we fight for public alternatives to financing are some of the things that oftentimes might not be, you know, in the front of everybody's mind, but really could reshape how our schools and our communities are funded.
Thank you, Brittany, and we hope to hear from you again during the discussion. And to wrap up the panel part of this is Steve Breyer, who's a professor in the Urban Education PhD program and the master's programs in Liberal Studies and in Digital Humanities at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he's worked since 1981. He teaches courses on US labor history at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. He's a member of the Professional Staff Congress at CUNY. A social and labor historian, he was the co-founder of CUNY's American Social History Project and the co-author and co-producer of the project's multimedia curriculum, Who Built America? Steve has published widely in a number of academic and popular journals on issues of race, class, and ethnicity in US labor and education history. His most recent book, co-authored with Michael Fabricant, is Austerity Blues, Fighting for the Soul of Public Higher Education. Let's welcome Steve.
Thank you, Donna. I'm delighted to be here and join this panel. And it's been inspiring to listen to the range of comments that people have made in their particular situations and the struggles that they and their fellow union members and fellow workers are going through. particularly pleased with Whitney's presentation because she touched on many of the same issues that I want to touch on. But what I'll do is to try to historicize, answer the question, how did we get here? How did we get 45 years later, after in the post-war period, what happened? We went from a public education system that was pretty significantly funded, particularly public universities, well-funded. When I went to public university in the 1960s, it was completely tuition-free. And I work at an institution, CUNY, City University of New York, that proudly had free tuitions as far back as 1847 and continuing until 1976. And so the question is, what happens, not just at CUNY, but nationally, public universities to, in effect, transform that system. And what I want to introduce here is the concept of austerity politics, which is partly the title of the book that Mike Fabricant and I wrote on university economic public economy, also of neoliberalism. The idea, in effect, that public goods need to be privatized because they're inefficient, they're a waste of money, and that the marketplace can be the better sort of driver of successful public projects and programs, as Brittany described them. And that's a political project, not just a project of Wall Street, but a project of the political parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. This is not just the right wing that does this. This is the middle of the mainstream of the Democratic Party, starting with Jimmy Carter in 1976, but extending through Bill Clinton, right up to Barack Obama, and with the Republicans taking the same policies and pushing them forwards. We've had a transformation, in effect, demonizes the public sector and says that the only way we can transform things is to privatize goods and make them profit-driven, using metrics to measure their success. And in effect, we've gone from the public university, a tuition-free system in places like New York and California and in other places, to ones in which public university students are paying dollars to attend public institutions that when I went in the 1960s were completely free to me. And we've got to fight to change that. As has suggested, there's an important insight that we need to have about the ways in which debt, including student debt now is $1.7 trillion. It's second only to mortgage debt in the United States in terms of the largest pool of indebtedness in the country. It exceeds credit cards even. And that fact is basically driven by public institutions, in effect, going from tuition-free institutions to students and their families. And we've accepted that. And what we fight is always, well, let's keep the tuition increases to a model. What we should be fighting for is free tuition. That's exactly what we're doing in the City University. We're trying to get back to the idea of tuition-free public higher education in the city of New York, something that we proudly did for 130 years. And what changed it, and it's instructive, we tend to think that, you know, neoliberalism and austerity politics are a function of, in fact, the Reagan administration, tobacco strike in 1980. In fact, the first sort of shot across the bow of public institutions was in 1976 when New York City, on the verge, had to go down to the federal government to speak to Gerald Ford, the Republican vice president who replaced Richard Nixon, and asked out. And they were told by Ford and by Bill Simon, the Treasury Secretary, that in effect there were the federal government was not going to give the New York City a dime. One was to our ambitious public hospital system in New York, Second was our generous welfare payments to families in trouble and struggling. It was free tuition at CUNY. And those three things were the reason why the Ford administration, in that great headline from the Daily Ford to City drop dead, that was why they told the city of New York to drop dead. So in effect, from 1976 to our own time, we've seen that kind of policy, political policy at the federal, state, and city level imposed upon public institutions. We just gotten through finally 10 years of a supposedly liberal Democrat as governor of this state. Andrew Cuomo, thankfully, is now out of office, who systematically underfunded public institutions. By the way, just like his father Mario in the 80s. So this is a Democratic and Republican issue. And one of the things that working people really need to understand is they need to fight for something larger than just wage gains and better benefits. They need to fight for something larger. That's when the labor movement is done its successful work, is when it's fought for something larger. And this is a moment in which we need to do that. So fighting austerity politics wherever we can. And as Brittany said, you can substitute almost any public entity or institution for the public university, and it's the exact same problem. It's whether it's K-12 or higher ed, or it's housing, or it's welfare, or it's any sort of institution. All of them are under attack, and they're under attack by austerity politics, which we really need to and really say, as Brittany suggested, that taxing the rich is at least the first step. We've money. There's this country in the world, and we always find money for the things that we say that matter, like the military, or like making sure that Wall Street profits or the stock market does well. But when it comes time to fund public institutions, the door closes, and we need to sort of really confront that and understand that policy and politics is extended over the last almost half century and how we need to confront it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, for that sort of rousing call. And thank you to all of our speakers. You've all sort of opened up different aspects, different facets of this problem. Again, our focus is education, but as Steve was just saying, this extends across, and Brittany also, all of our public services. One of the themes that we have picked up frequently in these First Fridays is the concept of bargaining for the public good, bargaining for the common good, bargaining for things that are not just strictly defined the terms and conditions within our own union contracts, which of course are important. But if we don't build our power to win these bigger fights, to address and build solidarity across all of our unions and all the workers that we can kind of fold in and organize and get on the same page, we're going to be stuck in a context in which whatever gains we make in our contracts are ultimately going to be for naught, because the whole rest of the support structure, the picture is going to undercut it. I've experienced this myself in my own union. I'm like Donna, I'm in United University Professions. I'm the chapter president at SUNY New Paltz of UUP. And I was involved in the negotiations for our current contract a few years ago, in which we got 2% increases, because that's basically what Andrew Cuomo was interested in giving to all of the state unions. Nobody got more than a 2% across the board increase. But it took us so long to get to a contract, because basically, the governor didn't care and didn't feel like he needed to. This is why we need to build power to kind of put them on the spot and to demand some things. But once we got our long delayed contract that had a couple of years of 2% increases, our institutions were essentially hung out to dry because they didn't appropriate additional money to cover the cost of our negotiated salary increases at SUNY, which meant that at New Paltz, okay, they said, I mean, they're, consistently for, as long as I can remember, and I've been working there for 27 years, they have been pleading poverty and talking, going around with a begging bowl and worrying about not having enough money to do anything. And they cite, oh, we have the union contract we have to pay for. It's one of the reasons that they're in the hole. This isn't right, right? And unless and until we can more effectively organize and leverage our power to address that larger situation, the debt crisis that Brittany's talking about. I'm sure, Wall Street works overtime devising exotic instruments of all kinds. It doesn't even necessarily take exotic instruments to cause the trouble. When, the state says, Governor Cuomo was really great about walking in and saying, oh, look here, I'm going to give you all the, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to build some new building or build a new dorm or do, whatever on your campus. And how many times do we hear the refrain, wait, we have all this money for this building, but you can't pay us, a living wage? Our adjuncts at New Paltz are now just making about $3,400 to teach an entire 3-credit course for a semester with no teaching assistants. You have to, and you have to have a graduate degree to do this work, this piecework for miserable wages. So they don't have money to pay the people actually doing the teaching, or, childcare people to do, who are actually doing the actual childcare, the most important piece of the job, you would think. But no, we have money that we're going to plow into building all of these buildings. And I can tell you that at New Paltz, we had a report from last year on our campus that the debt service that they owe to the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York, which is the agency that puts out the bonds and provides the funding for these building projects on our campuses. The debt service at New Paltz alone is over $10 million a year. That's if they had $10 million that the state had, if the state would have originally simply invested that upfront direct, here, we're going to give you money to build your buildings and not put it out to bond, we would have that money that we could be using for the needs that we desperately have now. As it is, last year, because of the pandemic, the state restructured the bonds for the state of the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York and relieved the campuses for 2 years, last year and this fiscal year, of their responsibility for the debt service. But that's coming back next year. The presence of this debt service sort of Damocles is what has driven a number of really disturbing decisions on our campus. Coming back this fall, they insisted that all of our, like 80% of our courses be in person, despite the fact of the concerns about the Delta variant that emerged just a few weeks before classes. There were prudent steps that they might have taken to kind of, adjust things, de-densify some of the classrooms, do some other things on the campus. They refused to do any of them. The common talking point I'm hearing across the SUNY system from a number of different campuses is they're saying, oh, we're keeping a promise that we made to our students about having in-person classes. I can tell you we have a lot of students who are very concerned about being thrust into overcrowded classrooms in person to complete their degrees. They're not worried. I would contend it's not they're worried about keeping the promise to the students. They're worried about, the state is worried about keeping promises to its bondholders. So this whole public-private situation, that the austerity politics that Steve talked about are absolutely sort of like the root cause of this, but we're seeing the manifestations when, Matt is talking about the schools not being able, and Winnie about the schools not being able to provide a number of the services that are essential for the students' well-being. You know, that they may not have at home a hot meal, but they come to school and they can get that, right? These very fundamental things are all challenged by this. And it's something that we as workers, as unionists, need to think more creatively about building our power together to address all of this. Okay, well, I've been kind of on my stump here a little bit, but I want to actually, we had a couple questions in the chat. Diana Zuckerman, if I can find Diana here, I'd like to unmute you here. So if you'd like to ask your question about staff shortages, I know, nice to see you here, Diana. She teaches the school district my kids went to in Rondout Valley.
Yes, I taught both of your kids and some of your nieces and nephews on here, and I've lobbied with so many of you, so it's nice to see you all here. So I have been walking around my school feeling sickened, shocked, disheartened, and distressed with the fact that 72,000 healthcare workers and educators in New York City are having their last day today, losing their jobs, and you're talking about shortages and cuts and meeting the needs of our youth. All these people losing their jobs are our neighbors, community members. They are paying for childcare and also taxpayers in our school systems. So, you know, me being this major union activist for so many years, I've always felt like and thought that our union was here for protection, support, solidarity, and to help us maintain our dignity. And that can mean choice in what we do with our bodies. So people are losing their jobs because of the mandated vax, and also because they don't want to be tested by something that goes into their body and would prefer a saliva test option. So I'm really concerned about the mandatory vax situation that's happening with a lot of our workers. And I'm extremely disheartened with the position of labor. And as somebody who has worked with our unions for so many years, like all I could think of is, where is labor? Why am I the only one walking around my school building stressed out and concerned and anxious every day that all of these workers are going to be out on the streets without jobs? And it's really impacting people of color, and it's impacting people who live in poverty. And as I said, our neighbors. So, you know, all of you here as people that I've worked with really closely and have admired and really counted on, you know, like, so where is labor? Why aren't we defending and fighting against the mandatory vaccine for these workers to be able to maintain their jobs in ways that we have been doing since the pandemic began?
Okay, would any of our panelists like to respond to Diana? I know that within my own union, UUP, they've been very big on encouraging people voluntarily to be vaccinated. And that, you know, I think a fundamental bottom line for unions should be to ensure that people not be losing their jobs over such a mandate. It's about, you know, that's fundamentally about protecting people's jobs and, you know, negotiating whatever the disciplinary process is going to be. So I'm not sure what's been going on in K-12 with any of this.
We're supportive of, we're anti-mandate. We highly recommend and are encouraging all of our members, which I think most of them have, to get vaccinated or test. And some districts are doing the saliva test. I know Port Jervis and Orange County is doing it. Once a week, teachers spit in a thing, put it in the mailbox, and they're tested. I believe the UFT sued the city over the mandate, lost. There's federal precedent, you know, supporting vaccines mandates, like for measles and mumps and other things. But our position is, I mean, Mac, is that we don't want anybody to be forced to take it. There's a lot of, people that don't want to do it, and that it should be a choice. We think it's a good idea. We support it. But if not, we should have a testing regime, regardless of whether they're vaccinated or not. We think everybody should be tested as a way to kind of stop this from spreading and protect our children and our workforce. So I'm not sure. I can't speak for the UFT, but I believe they're fighting it, but they lost the lawsuit because the legal precedents just aren't there to support it. But I know statewide, NYSET is supporting or is against a mandate. I think educate, not mandate. I think that's a CSA slogan, actually.
April, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Hello, I believe Diana. I don't have an answer for your question. I'll start there. And CSEA, I believe, I haven't read the past couple of days, the most recent kind of facts on the position of CSEA. And also I'm really not in a position to comment about CSEA in that sense, but I think you're asking about labor as well. And I don't really have a good answer for that, but I do think that I have sat in quite a few conversations with CSEA members and local and unit leaders and officers. And what I have learned is that in some of the most, for lack of a better word, stronger, meaning the greatest number of members, the greatest number of engaged members, however you might define a strong union. I think it's just, power in numbers and resources, but also they're having the conversations and really attempting to forget about partisanship and I think focus on your question a little bit about, well, where is labor? I think one of the last a couple months ago, I sat in on an executive board meeting and it was a tense conversation, but I applauded them for being brave. So my apologies for not being able to or having an answer, but I think that's for us to talk about.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, I can actually, I think, make another connection to the public-private business because I know at New Paltz, the testing regime that they have is run by a private lab, Enzo Labs from Long Island. There is a saliva testing, a pool testing situation that's actually run by members of my union up at Upstate Medical. So they're the ones that provide this kind of saliva pool testing statewide. And at New Paltz, they have elected not to use the pool testing, but rather to go with Enzo. And I can tell you, every time I have gone to be tested through that, I wind up getting an explanation of benefits from my insurance coverage that Enzo's making, it's I think like $134 or something for one test for me. And so that's, we've got this creeping privatization and monetization of every possible element, from the institutional debt to the student debt that the students are racking up on the bottom to, the stuff that Matt was talking about with, vouchers and charter schools and those sorts of things, which is a way of taking, like diverting things from that properly belong in the public sphere and sending them into a private situation where they can be monetized in some way. I'm wondering if we could maybe get into more of that sort of discussion, maybe away from the COVID stuff and getting into, what the effect on education is about all of this. Would anybody like to comment on that? Oh,
I don't know if there's any questions, but can I make a little comment?
Yeah.
Because I was able to meet, I didn't meet April, but I met some of her colleagues when they were organizing in the pandemic with the preschool situation. And I just, I just want to send a shout out to you, CSEA, and to all of the other unions who have continued to organize and help workers, especially in this pandemic. We get a lot of calls here from workers, and during the pandemic, we got at least 3-to-1 calls from non-unionized workers who were very concerned because they were put in really, it was a difficult work environment for everybody, but in particular, the non-unionized workers were facing insurmountable challenges because there was no organizing around their protection. So to everybody who was organizing out there, that was excellent. And this is very important. The folks that you happen to organize are my neighbors, and I know that they deserve a living wage, and I know that the work that they're doing is part of the infrastructure of this country, because you can't work unless you have peace of mind to know that your child is in an educational childcare setting and they're going to be cared for in that way, right? So I don't know if it's a comment or anything, but this is part of something that we should be looking at right now, this private sector making its way into the blurring of the line that happens. We see a lot of this happening, and these workers are they're just as exploited as the workers that I traditionally worked with at the chicken plant and the poultry farm, because I come out of food processing and all of that stuff. And it's tough work, it's heavy work, and it's not the right recompense.
Okay, Naomi Allen has had her hand up for a little bit. So Naomi, you have a question? And then we'll get back to.
Yeah, it's a question. I'm a retired New York City transit worker, and privatization has played a big role in transit politics as well. But I'm also a graduate of the CUNY system, and I graduated at a time when there was no tuition. It was completely free. As a matter of fact, we were indignant because we had to pay $26 a semester. And that was the student activities fee, and they wouldn't waive it. Even if you said, I'm never going to participate in student activities, you had to pay $26. And that was a source of great aggravation in those days. But as a transit worker, I have to say the effort to privatize has been gone on for decades now. And it's picked up steam in the last maybe 20 years. Where the union has kind of keeled over in contract negotiations and allowed the city and the state, which the transit system is run by the state, administered kind of by the city, so it's a very complicated system. But anyway, they brought in contractors in enormous numbers. I mean, I remember when they first wanted to use welfare workers to clean the subway stations. That was one issue. And now they have contractors all over the subway stations. They have contractors working on the signals, and contractors working on the tracks, and contractors working in the shops. And the real reason for this is not so much, I mean, I think it's not really to save money, not in transit. It's not so much to save money because contractors end up costing more. There's always a big bloat of the budget when a contractor is brought in and over budget, and they don't save money. I mean, it's much cheaper to use transit workers, but it weakens the union. And I think that's the chief reason they want to do it, and do it as much as they can, because that gives you a much smaller bargaining unit. You don't represent all the workers anymore who are on the job. You only represent a fraction of them. And when it comes time for contract or comes time for strike, you know that you're going to be much weaker than you would be if you didn't have these private contractors in there. So, but the real question is, as Steve Breyer says, this is a bipartisan position. The privatization and the austerity are bipartisan policies. And the unions only plan for fighting these things is lobbying, both lobbying and electing so-called friends of labor like Cuomo. Cuomo was a friend of labor, remember, when he's both of them when they were first running. And immediately these friends of labor turned around and stabbed the unions in the back. So the real question that seems like an elephant in the room because it hasn't really been addressed is how do we fight this austerity program, and who's going to lead this fight?
Okay, that's the 64,000 or 64 billion grant or whatever much money it would be now. Yeah, Sparrow, you have your hand up, and any of the panelists have.
Yeah, I think I have a question, and it's kind of going along with what she just said. And Steve said, this is like a slow motion crash. They're slowly, eating away at their commitment and the responsibilities, provide a sound education. But it's not happening quickly. It's kind of like global warming. It's very slow. It's not right in everybody's face. It's a little bit here, a little bit there. And, for example, the bus shortage statewide, a lot of districts have privatized their buses. At some point, some business manager said, you know what, we could save a lot of money if we privatize our buses. And they sold their whole fleets of buses. And they've sold, now these companies, they're at the mercy of these companies if they can't, who don't pay well sometimes. And, they're, instead of the school saying, we want a bus run here and a bus run here or go here, the private bus companies are telling them, no, we're going to do it this way. And they're at their mercy. And if they don't have enough people, oh, sorry, you can't run the buses. You have to redo your schedule. And, they gave up, public work to a private contract in hopes of saving some pennies. And so how do we blow the, it's never, sometimes it's big, they could close a hospital or something, but a lot of times it's very small things that we need to be up in arms about, that, even if it's 2 positions, it's an outrage, because it's not just 2, it's over the last 50 years, it's hundreds of thousands. And we're, and it's shifting of instead of the government paying for school, now it's the students, students are taking the lion's share. So I was asked, my question for the panelists is there a place we could point to, or even another country even, where we could say, hey, that works, or there's some solutions there where they're doing it right, where they're either, in more progressive taxation or different policies to prevent, or to make sure that the government lives up to its responsibilities with, serving the common good.
Okay, yes.
Tough question.
I'll respond a little bit to what Sparrow just asked, but really to what Naomi posed, which is sort of how and where and who's going to sort of lead it. It seems to me that the most important lesson the labor movement can take away from what's happened is it needs to build alliances, that we need a broad-based movement. It cannot simply be a war. It has to be a movement that involves communities of color, environmental groups. We've got such large major issues. We need a second struggle that in effect speaks to a range of different approaches and different identities in order to build enough coalition back the power we need to change things. It's easy to say that and a lot harder to do, but I do believe that has to happen at the local level. We do it by building something called CUNY Rising, which is a movement that in effect links our union, the PSC, with community-based groups. And when we've done that in New York City in the past, we've been able to accomplish things. It's when unions and community groups have fought and have been on opposite sides that we've lost power. And so we have to learn that lesson and really very hard. As for where there are progressive taxation situations, there are some places in Washington State and Oregon which have done that purely on the local small level. We've got the chance maybe to elect a Democratic Socialist from Buffalo. Interesting to see one elected official can't do it, But if you can get a group, the way we've got the start of a progressive in Congress, maybe we can start putting progressive policies forward. It seems to me the Democratic Party nationally, the Biden administration, for all its, missteps, at least compared to even where Obama was, we've made significant progress only because a progressive caucus has stepped forward and put forward, progressive ideas, socialist ideas that can mobilize people and build a broad enough coalition to change things. Are we going to succeed? Hard to know, but it seems to me that's the way we need to see.
Right. I think there's some interesting connections. I mean, this fundamental question of democracy and the role of education in democracy as a fundamental value and a fundamental concept that, people like to say the United States is about democracy, but we've been witness to so many situations now. I think, Matt, in your comments, you were talking about what the charter schools, because they lack the transparency, they lack the accountability that we expect from public institutions like education. I mean, I think of, some of the philosophy of John Dewey, who, understood that, that having solid, genuine public education is an absolute necessity if you're going to try to run a country as a democracy. It says something about us, I think, if we're trying to run our schools in ways that are undercutting that set of values. I don't know if you have any follow-up thoughts on that sort of issue, Matt, since you kind of touched on it in some of your comments.
Well, what you're just saying, I mean, it's funny to me that, or not funny, it's sad to me, but that, we have all these individuals, often rich individuals, who are looking to start all these other type of schools, right? We divert public funding to them. And instead of investing and seeing how that works, like let's put everything we have, into our youth, into our public schools. Let's truly make education the great equalizer. We try to find all these other ways to make it work, which is, really ends up being sort of a bunch of scams, in my opinion. So, I wish we would invest where, everybody has a chance.
Yeah, I'm seeing, was it my buddy Dan? Where did you go? Oh, Dan McCormick. Yeah, you have a question?
Not so much a question, but more to, when we're talking about things like privatization, I can go on and on about charter schools. I see the devastation that they've done in New Orleans when I go down there. But PEF has we've supported a bill which has at least 3 times been on our former governor's desk, which you would think he would be supportive of, but in all instances he vetoed it. And it was simply a cost benefit analysis. It was basically saying, like, before you decide to contract out, state services of any type, you should do a cost benefit analysis. Are you actually going to save money? Because, like it's been said earlier, often enough there is, more money being funneled into somebody else's pocket, and you're not investing in the state workforce. You're not investing in, the whole process, and to build, a better thing. They almost want to tear it down so they can basically privatize everything. So it was a really good bill. Like I said, it hit his desk at least 3 times. I'm hoping that our new governor, maybe we can get it through one more time, and maybe this time finally get it signed and put into action. And that might be just like a small step in the right direction, because, it would affect statewide, UUP, CSEA, and others. So, like I said, when the time comes, maybe that would be something we should consider. All of labor can get behind and support that.
Yeah, I think, Dan, that sounds like a positive bill that makes a lot of sense. Although I would also hasten to add that sometimes the costs of certain changes, the cost benefit analysis, it's not only dollars and cents, right? It's about,
absolutely.
So we got to find ways of calculating that into all of this as well. Brittany, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking about the sort of the how question, and even to Dan's last comment, I mean, I think there is also this like paradigm shift that has to happen where we really rethink about how much something might cost and how little we think the government has versus like how much we can actually collect from rich people and other sources. And so if we were to do a cost benefit analysis for some of our public goods, and it showed that it actually costs more, okay. You know what I mean? Like, and that's fine, right? Because there actually is money to fund some of this, and most of this work that we're trying to do. And so I think all of those steps are really important. And I also think that as we start reframing and shifting how we think about the work, we have to recognize that fixing a depleted and disinvested public housing system will cost a lot of money. Fixing, intentionally undercut education system for K through 12 will cost a shitload of money. And like, that's okay. You know what I mean? Because we can fund it. People deserve for it to be funded. People deserve not only for it to be restored, but for it to be reparative, because we know how intentional a lot of the disinvestment has been in these poor communities, in Black and Brown communities. So I think the other thing that, we need to really consider in how we shape our strategies, whether it's on the community side or on the labor side, is to really feel emboldened to ask for big numbers, because if we have the power to fight for the things that we want, we can get what we want instead of constantly settling for some of the crumbs that are often thrown our way.
Yeah, I mean, the current bizarre spectacle of what's going on with the reconciliation bill in DC right now is unreal to me. Why is it that anytime you're talking about funding things that actual human beings need, they've got to total it up over 10 years and you get a very large number, but every year they re-up the military budget, and it was $788 billion they just voted for 1 year, and they never do that for a 10-year span, right? That there's some really seriously screwed up priorities that need to be addressed, and has a lot to do, it has absolutely everything to do with power ultimately, and who has the power. I mean, the people voting on these things in Washington, most of them are voting power money. They're not voting their constituents so much. I mean, if you poll the constituents of almost, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, his constituents want more public money available for things that they need. And they would prefer not to see so much military spending, but what does he vote for? I've got a question in the Q&A. I'm going to open up for Evan from Mid-Hudson Valley DSA, because you've got an interesting question that may be a good one to go out on here. So if you'd like to speak, oh wait, where's Evan? Evan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so I'll just read my question word for word because I think I worded it pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm here from the Mid-Hudson Valley DSA, showing support, solidarity to you all, and thankful that you guys had this event tonight. It's been very informative. So I wanted to ask, how do we bring education about the topics discussed tonight to people who may be hesitant to join a growing labor movement?
I'd be interested to know, Evan, why do you think people are hesitant to join the labor movement?
Well, I don't have a full knowledge like it seems Professor Steve does, but maybe he can elaborate a little bit more on it. I do know that there was a significant drop in the membership of labor unions, I think starting around the 1970s or so. And around that time, you also see commensurate with it, generally speaking, a disconnect between the increase in people's wages and the increase in productivity in industry. So, really, I think what I've heard is that up to this point, we should have something along the lines of a $24, $25 minimum wage if it was commensurate with how productivity has increased. But we're still arguing for 15. So you would think from information like that, that people would be interested in joining the labor movement and fighting for those things. But I think one of the particular challenges that we may have is that that discourse doesn't really make it into the public discourse too often. Kind of, Beth, like you were talking about, when we're talking about bills passing, we use different contexts for talking about the numbers, right? And it kind of makes it so that if you're not really investigating it, you don't get that context and you're not really able to battle it. But challenging that narrative is also a great challenge in itself, because we don't have the megaphone to yell that out to the crowds. Like, how do we disseminate that information? How do we challenge it and get people to rethink the way that they imagine themselves as laborers?
Okay, yeah, thanks for the elaboration. Great question. I've got Matt ready to speak and then Steve.
Yeah, so that is a good question, Evan, and my answer is going to sound sort of simplistic, but when I look at my own experiences, I started teaching, I was not political in the least bit. I mean, I didn't involve myself at all, and it was through sort of teaching that I, learned, things that I wanted to fight for and things I didn't. And that was because, honestly, quite honestly, people had one-on-one conversations with me. I know it sounds kind of simple, but I think the idea of talking to people, I mean, I can use Sparrow as an example. I mean, I got to know Sparrow pretty early when I moved to Sullivan County. He would just ask me, hey, this event's going on, and I'd go there and I learned a little bit more. And so I think that's as important as anything. It's just asking people to attend things. I think in some cases, apathy stems from just not having the knowledge. And I think people have to be at things in order to gain that knowledge. So I really believe that, having those conversations, trying to bring people along is very important.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And Steve, and this will be our last comment before we close out, because we're at.
I'll just be
our
very
time.
quick. Just in response to Evan's question, I mean, he's absolutely correct that union membership exactly parallels, if you graph it, the decline in real wages from the 1970s forward. The labor movement was strongest at the end of the Second World War, when over 30%, almost a third of the workforce unionized. Now, in the private sector, we're down into single digits, maybe 7-8%. Interestingly, it's the public sector that is many of the people who are represented by unions on this call. It's the public sector which has real strength in terms of the labor movement, but people don't join, in part because there's been a vicious campaign by employers, abetted by, when the NLRB was under the control of the Republicans, by the NLRB, that in anti-union positions that are taken by employers. We saw it in the Amazon where they used, the most duplicitous kind of campaign strategies to get the union to position undermined, and they succeeded. And so this is a very tough moment for the labor movement. As a historian, this is as bad as it was in the 90s. That was a pretty awful time before, the real gains we made during the New Deal, and with the NLRA and the NLRB. And I despair, except for the fact that I think the public sector is the thing that's going to keep this going, and we've got to fight them, to get the union idea out there to as many people as possible.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Steve. And we are at our time. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and all of our audience members for your great questions and great discussion. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. I hope we've all kind of gotten a bit of energy from this and some inspiration. So we'll move forward in solidarity to make the changes that we need, right? And with that, I will take us out. Thank you.
Thank you.
When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than